Resident Evil 2's Remake is one of the best survival horror experiences I've had in the last few years. It easily eclipses most of the games in the franchise in almost every single category, reinventing the gameplay of the classic title while also being downright reverent with its attention to detail. The most immediate difference between the original and the remake are of course the graphics. The game has taken the pre-rendered backgrounds and turned them into gorgeously, fully realized explorable environments. Characters and their designs have been updated with realism in mind, making Leon's police armor look like actual SWAT armor and giving Claire a biker jacket instead of a vest. Though if you prefer the older outfits, those two have been lovingly recreated in beautiful detail for this engine in specific. The motion capture on the characters also match this high level of quality, though there are the occasional moments where the game scrapes the uncanny valley. However, these moments are buried under an honestly disgusting level of detail put into blood and viscera in this game. Every organ, muscle, and shred of skin is rendered gorgeously in this game, and all of it runs smoothly at 60 frames per second with almost no stuttering. This is in part thanks to the robust graphics menu on the PC, making setting up the game's appearance a breeze even for someone like me who's inept at tweaking visual settings. The visuals of course would be nothing without audio, and this game has the art of audio down to a science. Every footstep, every gunshot, every scream, cry, and shout is perfectly realized, and the musical score, when it's present, is almost as haunting as the originals, though maybe not quite as memorable. The next big change from the original would probably be the change in gameplay, swapping out the fixed cameras for an over-the-shoulder perspective with finely tuned aiming mechanics. While I had my own reservations about dipping too far into the action-focused Resident Evil 4 playbook, I was pleasantly surprised to find that this change in gameplay didn't actually change too much of what made Resident Evil 2 so intense. Enemies are veritable bullet sponges, taking upwards of 11 or 12 headshots to outright kill a normal zombie, and to say nothing of bigger enemies like the horrifyingly realized Lickers. This compounds with the introduction of weapon degradation to combat knives, making the tried and true method of stabbing grounded enemies until they die completely unviable for the long term. This is especially true since knives are one of the few defensive items that can get you out of enemy grapples and are thus incredibly valuable to keep in supply. The aiming mechanic also contributes to this difficulty, as moving while aiming leaves your reticle too wide to get an accurate shot at distance, and aiming while sitting still makes you a sitting duck. The first half of my initial playthrough was beset with a dearth of ammunition because I was still operating under the MO from older games in the franchise, using a scorched earth policy in an attempt to make my life easier later on. However, I began to encounter far more powerful enemies beyond zombies like the aforementioned Lickers, and quickly found myself outgunned as a consequence. This of course came to the heart of what makes the system work: item management and backtracking. Items can be easily categorized as weapons, ammo, defensive items, healing items, and key items, and determining what you need to take with you before setting out from a universal item box becomes the core of the game's anxiety. Every time you open it up, you need to weigh the weapons that you might need to bring, how much ammo you'll probably burn through, whether or not you're going to need a key item for what you're doing, wonder if you're going to take a hit, or if there's an enemy in the way that you know you're not going to be able to get away being grappled by. This ties nicely into the maze-like architecture of each location in the game, with looping paths and objects to kite around. You learn every in and out of the map, where every enemy that's still walking might be, and become acutely aware of radical changes to the environments like new paths or enemy placements. It's a game that takes the once antiquated art of forced backtracking and makes it both tense and rewarding for the modern age. The story is the only point where I think the game flounders a bit. Not to say it's weaker than the original game, in fact there are quite a few changes I really like, but there are a few noticeable changes that I'm not incredibly thrilled about. They're small, but noticeable, and I'll get to them in my spoilers section. I think overall the story is of a higher quality than the original, but this comes with a different issue in that the story doesn't really change between campaigns. The original Resident Evil 2 featured a rather revolutionary system where after playing the game with one character initially, you can play the game with the other character and see their side of the story. This effectively meant there were 4 campaigns to play through with unique story events and locations specific to those characters. While the remake does do this, the severity of the differences between the A and B stories for each character are minimal at best. Really the only difference is where Leon or Claire will start in the game and whether or not they'll have a brief, tragic friendship with Officer Marvin Branagh. The B characters also get to do a brief epilogue mission at the end of the game, but that's where the differences really seem to end. So while the quality of the story is arguably better, we ultimately got fewer variations on it. So I consider the story aspects sort of a wash in comparison with the other drastic improvements. Before I move on to my final thoughts and the spoiler section, I'd like to get a shout out to every single one of my lovely patrons. Especially new patrons CMS Tempert, Justin Jacobs, Felix Real, and Matthew McDonald. Without your support, my channel would be nowhere near as successful as it is. I hope to see you all in the Team Frostbite Discord server, which you too can join for donating just $1 or more to my Patreon. If you feel like supporting the channel but don't want to pay a dime, please like this video, subscribe to my channel, and share this video around. Don't forget you can contribute to the conversation by putting your thoughts down in the comments below about the game. I'd love to see what you have to say about it. Overall, I cannot recommend this game more, and if you're a fan of classic survival horror or are looking to get into survival horror, I cannot think of a better game to introduce you to the genre. Capcom Capcom, if you're listening, give everyone on this team a raise and move them on to the next remake. I'd love to see Nemesis get this treatment, even Code Veronica. But if you really want to make bank, please consider either remaking the Outbreak games in this style or create an Outbreak File 3 with this style. You've tried cooperative Resident Evil action games, but I think in this renaissance of cooperative play, you'll get plenty of people scrambling to get a cooperative Resident Evil horror game, especially if you leave the infection mechanic completely untouched. Now, with that finally said, on to my spoiler thoughts on the game. If you want to go into this game with all the surprises intact, please end this video here. There are no more warnings. First and foremost, Mr. X is one of the best adaptations of a monster in this franchise, turning what was effectively a wall just to run around in one or two different hallways into a proto-nemesis that haunts you through the whole police station. That can only bode well if Resident Evil 3 gets remade. My issues with the story, aside from the lack of variety, mainly stems from two side characters, Ben Bertolucci and Police Chief Brian Irons. Irons is the least severe in change, and in fact some of the expansions they did on him were greatly appreciated to flesh him out. Learning that he was the caretaker of this entire orphanage that was basically funneling test subjects to the underground laboratory was a brilliant stroke by the writers. However, replacing his poetic deliveries and grandstanding with a sleazeball money grubber persona I think took away from his personality more than a little bit. I used to love the fact that this guy thought so highly of himself even though he was nothing more than a shill. That, and for some reason the mayor's daughter wasn't eviscerated. Like, that was the most iconic part of Claire's campaign in the original game, walking in on the man with his body on his desk as he waxed poetically about life and death. So to see that not happen was incredibly disappointing. Ben, however, got the shorter end of the stick, and that disappoints me even more. He went from being the smooth, intelligent reporter who willingly locked himself in a jail cell for safety to being an anxious mess who got caught trying to blow the whistle on Irons. Topping that off, he gets killed in his only real scene in the game. Considering he got 2, maybe 3 scenes in the original game depending how you count it, that saddens me. Disappointing is also the number of missing enemies that didn't make the transition to the game. Giant spiders, crows, the giant moths, and the ivies are all missing, though there were at least some plant zombies that mirrored the poison ivy mechanically. And I suppose that was a little bit offset considering that the G mutation was changed from a boss fight to a reoccurring enemy type in the sewer section of the game. Similarly, the bow gun going missing is somewhat disappointing, though the variety of weapons being expanded on as well as gun enhancements being far more prevalent make this sting far more bearable. However, back on the positive side of things, this game is a fan's wet dream in how much it loves not just the game of Resident Evil 2, but the entire mythos around it. For example, having an RPD recruitment ad with Brad Vickers in the save room just off the hall where you traditionally killed his Easter egg zombie just to get secret weapons and outfits in the original game. Similarly, throwing in an Elzer Walker skin for Claire to pay homage to the infamous Resident Evil 1.5 was a nice touch. Even the novels got a little bit of love because the first achievement in the game for reaching the police station is literally City of the Dead, which is the title for Resident Evil 2's novelization. As someone who got into the franchise through that book in particular, this gesture was especially appreciated. That's really everything I have to say about the game. I can't wait to see what Capcom does with the next part of the franchise because with this and Resident Evil 7 under their belt, I think they've got their mojo back when it comes to horror. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I'll be working on a review for Kingdom Hearts 3 next, so stay on the channel and watch out for that. Catch you all on the flip side.